From as early as 5 or 6 years old, I can remember being interested in cars, racing and speed. My dad was a motor mechanic, and after the war, nobody really had any money to buy racing cars, so people used to build specials. And I can remember as a 6-year-old sitting on the bench watching my dad prepare specials. And also we were a motor racing family. My dad raced bikes before the war, and there wasn't a month went by without us going to a racetrack to see motorcycles or cars or speedway or something like that. So I grew up in that atmosphere. So when I got to be a teenager in South Africa, I wanted to be a racing driver. I never thought about design actually, and growing up and as an early teenager, 13, 14 years old, but as I got towards the sort of 16, 17, I really wanted to start racing. I should have looked in the mirror and seen I was this tall and this heavy, but nevertheless I wanted to go racing. So I was going to technical college and do mechanical engineering, and I had an apprenticeship with an engineering company. So I was earning a little bit of money, and I had the academic knowledge from the technical college. So I decided the only way I could go racing, because I had no money in those days and my parents weren't wealthy, was to design and build my own car and my own engine. So when I was 18 years old, I started designing the car, building it, which took 2 years. And I raced that for 2 years in South Africa with some success. But after that, I thought, if I really want to get on in racing, I need to go to the UK really, which was the center of the universe for my two loves, music and racing. So I sold everything I had and bought a ticket on a cargo boat and set off in the winter of '69 for the UK. So when I arrived in the UK from South Africa in the winter of '69, I wanted to get a job in car design, not Formula One or racing. I didn't think I was at that level at all. So I trudged around all the car companies. I went to Lotus or Ford amongst others. And then I lucked in after about 4 or 5 months. I was going for a job interview at Fair Oaks Aerodrome where Len Bailey was designing a car for Ford for Le Mans, and they were advertising for a draftsman. And he was messing me around a bit. Yes, they did want somebody, they didn't want somebody, they didn't have the money, they did have the money. And one of the guys in the studio said, Brabham Formula One team just up the road at Byfleet, they're looking for a designer. So I didn't have any money for taxi, so I walked to Byfleet and walked in, and Ron Toranak, who was the chief designer working with Jack Brabham in those days, did a 15-minute interview with me, not interested in my academic qualifications whatsoever, but interested in the fact that I'd designed my own engine and car and won races. And I got the job. And as I was leaving, the real guy for the job turned up. So I just absolutely lucked in. Yes, I suppose I had a rather unusual approach as a racing car designer. I've always loved the unfair advantage. You can get that two ways. You can get that from innovative design, by designing clever stuff on the car, making the car high performance, and you beat people that way. And the other way is looking at the rules and looking for loopholes. And I was not bad at either one of those, so it was a mixture. Our success at Brabham was a mixture of those two, I think. The Brabham fan car, the BT46B in 1978, was a necessity because Lotus had just found ground effect wing cars where they had the big sweep down the side of the car that produced the downforce and sliding skirts. We had a big wide flat 12 Alfa Romeo engine, so we couldn't do that. So I had to think of another way of generating downforce, otherwise we would have been left standing basically because everybody was copying Lotus by then, so everybody was getting these wing cars or ground effect cars. So I said to Bernie, we're going to have to do something quite radical because we can't do that sort of car. I wasn't inspired by the Chaparral actually, because the Chaparral was quite a funny device. It had 2 extra engines driving fans on the back, and that wasn't allowed in Formula One. So we had to think of a way that would sit within the Formula One rules. And there was an aerodynamic rule that said, if something's primary purpose was to influence the aerodynamic performance of the car, it had to be stationary, so you couldn't have movable aerodynamic devices. So I designed the fan, so 55% of the fan's performance was for cooling, pulling air through the water radiator, and 45% was sucking it to the ground. I never said it didn't suck the car to the ground. I just said its primary function is to cool the car. And of course we tested that at Brands Hatch and at Bolocco in Alfa Romeo test track in Italy, and arrived in Sweden and won the race. That was a lot of fun. A lot of hard work, but a lot of fun. Carlo Chiti, he was head of Auto Delta He was a lovely old chap, rather eccentric. I really got on with him very, very well. And he was originally ex-Ferrari and then left Ferrari, and he set up Alta Delta, which was the racing wing of Alfa Romeo, and just outside Milano. And I went down there and lived there for a month and got to know everybody. Had to learn Italian very quickly. Carlo was a bit like me, up for anything a bit different, and anything to get the unfair advantage. So we worked together really well, actually, over a 3-year period with Alfa Romeo. I quite often get asked which are my favourite Brabhams, and I've got a sort of a varied answer. If I had to pick one, it would probably be my first car that won a Grand Prix, which was the Brabham BD44 with the Cosworth V8. That was a very clean car, a triangular shaped car, and very, very different from all the other cars on the grid. So that's probably my outstanding favourite. But I do also love the BT49, which was my first championship car, and also the 52, which was my second championship car with the BMW turbo engine. So those are the three, really. But if I had to pick one, it would be the 44. My first memory of coming to McLaren after I left Brabham in 1986 was, in fact, how disorganised they were. I thought that Brabham was a much smaller team on a fraction of their budget, but we had very good systems in place for testing regimes, testing gearboxes, testing cars, torsional twist of the chassis and all that sort of stuff. And I thought McLaren, with their budget, you know, that would all be tickety-boo when I arrived. And when I turned up, I mean, there was virtually nothing. So I had to introduce, before I started designing the first car, I had to introduce all those disciplines into the business. That was my first impression. The McLaren MP44 was an interesting story because when I arrived, the car for the 87 season had already been designed by a conglomerate of about 6 people after John Barnard left. It was very much John Barnard's car, just modified for the 87 season. And by then, John's very successful car from 81 was getting a bit long in the tooth and wasn't really that competitive anymore. So I decided I would start the car for the next season, 88, from a clean sheet of paper, and not use anything from the last regime. I had just done a very radical lay-down Brabham, with a lay-down driving position at Brabham, which was unsuccessful because the engine we laid over at 15 degrees, the BMW didn't work very well at all, and some other reasons as well. But I knew the concept was dynamite. It really was fantastically quick aerodynamically. So all I did was I just took exactly the Brabham principle and designed a completely new car with a lay-down driving position, with a very radical rear end and gearbox to make sure that the aerodynamics worked very well. It was all a bit of a rush, and we went to a test at Imola in Italy just before the first race. That was the only test we managed to do, and we were 1.5 seconds lap quicker than anybody, so I knew it was going to be a good season. I got on really well with Ayrton, you know, and we became very good friends, and he knew I liked bright coloured shirts, and he bought me some wacky jackets and things during the years. We were very good friends, but I also respected him, and we worked very well together in the car. You know, he's a very quiet, very intense person when he got to the racetrack. He absolutely lived and breathed racing cars. We would often sit and talk for ages about strategy and about not just a race, but qualifying, trying to get on pole position and that sort of stuff. And we worked out a few sort of strategies together on how we would tackle different circuits and different climatic conditions and tyre choice and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, my memories of Ayrton are great both on and off the track. Well, the McLaren F1 project started at Linate Airport in Italy when we were stuck. The principals at McLaren, the directors, if you like, and shareholders, was myself, Crichton Brown, Mansour Ogier and Ron Dennis. The plane was late. And we started chatting about where the group would go next. Now, when I started at McLaren, I'd already done 17 years at Brabham, and I really wanted to move on to something else, in particular, road sports cars. I wanted to try and beat Ferrari, basically, out Ferrari with a sports car. But Ron Dennis lost John Barnard, and he talked me into doing just 3 more years in Formula One. But I said to Ron, 3 years and that's it. So when we were in Linate, I only had 1 year left to go of my 3-year contract. So I was already thinking, what am I going to do after this? That's as exciting as Formula One. And they were all thinking, you know, we need to expand the group, what are we going to do? So in that little 2-hour meeting, we decided we'd start a car business. And Crichton Brown, who was commercial, and I would break away from the main company and set up a brand new company. So in 1990, I walked into an empty building, absolutely empty building, with Crichton and a part-time secretary, and started McLaren Automotive. When we decided to start a sports car business or an automotive business, I had harbored a desire to do the ultimate sort of driver's car and sports car for a long time, to try and out Ferrari. And I suggested we start with an iconic sort of halo type product. And that's when the F1 started to formulate in my mind. And I had a completely free hand to design the building, everything, right down to the plants and pictures, lay out the building and design the best car I could. So I had it, in every sense of the word, I had a true clean sheet of paper when I started the F1. The experience of starting the F1 was incredibly daring if you think about it. The trust the other shareholders and directors had in me. I mean, I could have produced something rubbish. You know, I'd done a few road cars before, but nothing at this level. It was this launch into the unknown with an absolute clean sheet of paper, not just for the car design, but for the company, for the customer base. We had no idea. It was the first $1 million car in the world, and we had no idea how many people out there could afford $1 million, for example. So the whole thing was a bit daring and romantic. Before I started designing the F1, I thought of what I should do is just benchmark stuff that was out there. So we begged borrowed cars, and they were the F40, the Bugatti EB110, a Jaguar XJ220, and a Porsche 959. And those were the cars that we benchmarked. So I had a day on the racetrack with them all, in the wet and the dry. And then I had a couple of days on the road driving them all. And none of them were what I wanted to do. But it was fantastic to drive them because, funnily enough, when you're trying to do an ultimate anything, in this case it was a sports car, you need to know not what to do as much as you know what to do. So it's almost more important to know what's bad about the cars. And they all had some funny traits, you know. If you take the Ferrari F40, that was a fantastic fun car on the track. I mean, it really, really was. It had one of the best steering systems I've ever felt on a motor car. Only second best to a Lotus Elan, but it was such a crude car. I mean, when you looked around it, it was just so badly put together. It was the opposite of what I wanted to do. And then the Bugatti EB110 was a strange thing, which never really saw the light of day. I think they only built a handful of them before they stopped. That was a sort of a hybrid chassis that had a bit of carbon and a bit of riveted aluminium, and it had a very complicated turbocharged power system. It was four-wheel drive. It was way too heavy, and I thought a bit ugly, and it was very dissatisfying to drive on the road with the turbo lag and stuff. It wasn't one of my favorite cars. The Jag XJ220 we dismissed out of hand because it was a huge, heavy motor car with a little turbocharged engine in it, which is not where we were wanting to go. The Porsche 959 was a fantastic motor car to drive on the track. I mean, it really was, because although it was four-wheel drive, which normally wrecks the driving experience, it had a very little amount of the drive on the front wheels, so it still felt like a rear-wheel drive car. And in the wet in particular, it was very good. But again, as a motor car, it was really, if you dig down under a 959, it's a Porsche 911 in the middle with a fiberglass bit on the front and on the back, which again was just not where I wanted to go. So I distilled all that experience during the benchmarking and decided what I wanted to do, wrote down the do's and don'ts, if you like, before we did the F1. After the F1, Ferrari had to respond, obviously, because we were doing a big sell on the F1 was Formula One technology on the road. You know, it was the first ground effect car, first active aero, it was the first carbon fiber structure, and all that sort of thing. High revving engine. The engine itself was better than the latest Ferrari V12. So Ferrari had to respond. And their response was, here's Formula One technology from Ferrari on the road, and they did the F50. Now, I've never driven one, but I know a lot of people that have them. And By all accounts, it's a very good car, but I think they went a step too far because, like Formula One cars, they bolted the engine directly to the chassis with no anti-vibration mountings. And everybody that's driven one says they're very rough and noisy. So I think they took the Formula One technology just a step too far, really. And it didn't come anywhere near the lightweight or the performance envelope of the F1. So it was a good try, though. When I started the F1, I had to find an engine, obviously. I really wanted the minimum of a V10, but I really would have loved a V12. Formula One was then 10 cylinders. So we thought, our partner was Honda. We just won 3 world championships with Honda. So I thought, fantastic. So I started talking to the technical guys over in Tochigi in Japan. And I knew the president very well, Kawamoto-san then. I knew him very well, he was a racer. So they were quite keen to do the engine. And I wanted around 4.5 litres, a 10 or a 12. So we started talking to them about a 4.5 litre, probably V10 they were leaning towards because of the Formula One connection. And we got quite a long way down the road. And then their marketing people got hold of it and they said, look, our biggest engine at the moment is a 3 litre V6 in the NSX. And this is not the direction the marketing's going for the road car, so where's it going to take us? So at the last minute, they decided they wouldn't, which left me in the lurch a little bit. So I did shop around, and Isuzu had shown a show car, a supercar, which looked really good, and they had shown a multi-cylinder engine in that. So we did have a chat with them as an alternative, but it never really went anywhere. Which is my favourite McLaren F1, the original road version or the racing version? And it's a complicated answer because the most pure version of the car is the car as it was designed. And those are actually now pretty valuable if people haven't messed around and put wings and things on them. But of course, I have a soft spot for the GTR because winning Le Mans, I think only twice in the history of the race have people won first try, if you like. And to take a road car there and come first, third, fourth and fifth and 13th, first time out, and beating all the prototypes, that was pretty special. And actually, when I look back, that's probably my favourite racing memory as opposed to winning 5 world championships in Formula One. I think it's much harder to win Le Mans than it is to win a Formula One world championship. So the GTR is very special to me as well. So that's a 2-part answer, if you like. The SLR was a really interesting program because Mercedes had never done a composite motor car before. So they asked McLaren Cars, as it was then, the automotive company, my company, to do all the engineering. They did the styling on the car, but we did the aerodynamics, we did all the engineering, all the design, full vehicle development, homologation, and we even built the manufacturing facility and we built all the cars. The bit people probably don't know is the McLaren F1, of course, we were only making 30 cars a year. So using Formula One composites was easy because it's a very slow process with autoclaving and vacuum bagging and all that stuff. The SLR, they wanted the factory to be able to make 500 cars a year. So using Formula One technology like the F1 just wasn't an option. So the bit that probably people don't know is we had to develop a brand new way of making composites for the chassis and for the body with a resin infusion system, a resin transfer system. And so we built a factory down on the south coast and we invented a new way of making carbon fiber at high volume. For example, the whole roof structure, the spider we call it, with all the A pillar, B pillar and the roof and everything, that's a hollow section. And that was molded in one piece, whereas normally you'd bond together 18, 20 pieces of carbon fiber to make that roof spider. And we did that by putting hollow bags inside the sections in the roof and putting thousands of little plastic beads under pressure and compressing them and firing them into it and letting them expand and consolidate the fibers inside the roof. So we had to be very inventive to make 500 cars a year. I think McLaren as a company have made some brilliant motor cars. They've driven all the latest supercars. And something like the 720S is a phenomenal motor car with its capability, let's say. So on a track and on the road, I've driven both. I've driven them on a track and the road. And the 720S is probably typical of all the cars people are making now. And there's this move to hybridization. And they are fantastically capable motor cars. The current crop from Ferrari, Aston Martin, McLaren, all those, Porsche. However, they do fly in the face of what we represent in Gordon Murray Automotive, because they're all getting more complicated, heavier, and they have more and more, let's say, systems on them that interfere with the driving interface, the human-machine interface. And that's what the F1 didn't do. You drive an F1 and you know you're driving a sports car, and it won't drive itself for you. A lot of the modern cars now, you feel like anybody could drive them quickly because they've got all these electronic systems and hydraulic systems and roll compensation and traction control and all this stuff. So they're extremely capable cars, but they don't have a lot of soul. The T50 or Type 50 was born from two different things. One was November 2017, we celebrated 50 years of car design. We had an exhibition with 42 of my cars to celebrate that. And at the same time, we decided we should do one more supercar, one more great analog supercar to celebrate 50 years. A bit like Ferrari with the F40 and the F50, for example, which celebrated 50 years of Enzo. And the second reason is probably the most important one. The second one was, I truly believe nobody has done a driver-focused, lightweight, pure motor car like the F1 in the last 28 years. There's been some great cars out there, you know, the F50, they had a go, the Enzo, the Porsche Carrera GT was, you know, a good driver's car, but they were all pretty big and heavy, and they all had things that interfered with the human-machine interface, which is the fun with the F1. So, two reasons, celebrating 50 years, but also, if nobody else has done one, why don't we do one? And we think it's going to be the last great driver's motor car, an analog supercar. I think throughout the course of automotive history, but and particularly sort of, let's say, modern history, the second half of the automotive histories, you know, from the 40s or 50s, things like supercars have been inspiration for all the other designers. They've been a point of inspiration by introducing new technologies, new systems, beauty in some cases, lightweighting, for example, powertrain development. And I think they should always do that, no matter what the powertrain is. Eventually, even when we have electric cars, I think there should still be supercars. And to the point, are they penalized? I think they are, really. I mean, like classic cars, for example, classic cars are now exempt from the emissions regulations and MOTs because together they represent such a tiny, tiny proportion of the world's vehicles, and supercars are very much the same. So, you know, having to conform to all the homologation regs of mass production cars, I think is a little bit unfair, but that's what we have to do. My great hero is Bob Dylan, but that doesn't count as a band because he hasn't really ever had much of a permanent band during his 60 years or so. But the three bands, that's an easy one. Without a doubt, the Beatles. George Harrison was my closest friend for 25 years. And I still love that music. It never ages. You know, it's the amazing thing. You listen to a lot of bands you thought were good 20 years ago, and I hardly play the albums, but the Beatles stuff just doesn't age. The construction of the music, not just the sound, was very, very clever and innovative at the time. Secondly, Led Zeppelin, similarly, I just never stopped listening to them. They were just so innovative and special. And thirdly, it has to be Jimi Hendrix. Same thing, I just never get tired of listening. I think the F40 is outlaw blues, because at the time, it was such a dramatic motor car. You know, the F40 came out of nowhere. It was really left field. It was very raw and ragged and lightweight and quick, and not what Ferrari did at all up until that point. So outlaw blues for that one. Well, the Bugatti EB110, there's another Dylan song, and that's Long Time Gone, because it was somebody's idea, inspiration to do a very complicated four-wheel drive, turbocharged car in a very expensive factory. It just didn't work, basically. And it's not really become an iconic motor car, even since, they stopped making it. So the Countach, that was a car that turned up and it was absolutely dramatic. It was like a new start in, not just styling, but in the sort of stance of the car. It was really low. It was actually born out of a car that somebody did for Alfa Romeo a few years earlier called the Caribou. That was the inspiration for the P400, the Countach. So that would be my Dylan song, that would be New Morning, because that was a fresh start, if you like, in car shapes. The Jaguar E-Type, when that came out, that was a sensation. It was designed by an aeroplane aerodynamicist. That's why it's got such gracious aerodynamic lines, and it's got all the perfect curves. I mean, it's one of those cars that you want to wash because the shape is so sensuous and so lovely. And it's, again, when you see one now, it still looks absolutely beautiful. The curves and everything are just perfect. So my Dylan song for the E-Type would be Just Like a Woman. The Ferrari 250 GTO is a real sort of evergreen, really. It was the pinnacle. Carlo Chiti was involved in that, and Mauro Fugere, I think. That was from the early 60s, and it was a beautiful little Ferrari 3-litre V12 engine that was in so many of the cars. It was a very successful racing car in its time, and it stood the test of time, and it keeps recycling itself. So, it's going up and up and up in value. Every new generation that comes along seems to like that car. So now you're getting, I know people that are in their 40s that have bought a 250 GTO, and they're incredible value. So my Dylan song for that would be Eternal Circle. Well, the McLaren F1, my Dylan song for that would be Forever Young, which is a fantastic song he wrote for his son. Beautiful words, but it's the sentiment. I think the F1 has really stood the test of time. It still looks relatively current today, even though it's the design is 30 years old this year, and we launched it 28 years ago. So I hope it stays forever young.